Speaking through the gray. Speaking through the gray. Speaking through the gray. How did it happen?
Hi guys, I'm Dan.
And I'm Jasmine.
Welcome back to Speaking Through the Gray, episode number 13. We are here with our good friend Wayne Morgan. Some would call him the Martin Luther of Halloween.
That post took off way more than
It really did.
We were coming up with ideas of how we would introduce you. I was like, the man who hates Halloween. No, I was just kidding. But that was one of the reasons. Like after that post, I was like, we got to get Wayne on. And I'm like, he knows how to stir the pot.
I know how to
and
poke the bear. Yeah. And I stab both sides while I do it.
Yeah, no, that was such a good conversation. And we're ready to have some good conversations here today for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Sounds great.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So tell us about like your background, your past ministry and your current ministry experiences.
Oh man. So I started out as a youth pastor in Susquehanna County, and I was like a part-time guy. And I was there for 2 weeks, and the lead pastor quit. So I learned how to lead a church through transition at the age of 21. And so
Wow.
I learned a lot. That church was super gracious, great people, just loved me through that transition. But I felt all by myself through that whole process. And I'm like, I didn't even graduate Bible college at that point. Like I was going back to the Bible college going, hey, and they're like, sorry, you know.
Good luck. Let us know if you learned something.
Exactly. You should write a book about that, you know? And then I went into a youth pastor's lunch thinking that I'd find my people, and all they did was complain about their senior pastors.
Oh.
So I threw some money on the table. I was like, at least you guys have a senior.
Yeah.
See ya. And shortly after that, I met Jerry Major with Youth for Christ, and was able to go on staff with Youth for Christ and learned a lot about going. You know, like go into all the world. Like churches think they're going because they throw a great event at their church. That's an invitation. That's not outreach. And so going into the world and just, and then through that process, developed really great relationships across the valley, across the area, and just started recognizing that there's beauty in all these churches and they just don't know each other exist.
Yeah.
And so
that's very true.
there's a part where I was sick for a little while, and I had pastors crossing in the doorway of my hospital room. I was like, oh, you know, Pastor so-and-so? And they're like, no. And I was like, that's a problem.
Wow.
And through that issue, you know, like we were able to start walking into a place of networking and helping pastors see the value in each other, helping to connect them, don't be an island. And especially here in this area, a lot of bivocational pastors. So started working with the National Network of Youth Ministries 13 years ago, and was the regional coordinator. And now I work in the national side of things, training and coaching our staff. So,
Wow.
So that's my full-time role. I also part-time pastor at Cross Creek Lehman, and I'm still kicking it with Restored's youth group. So I'm preaching
busy.
preaching what I'm practicing what I preach here. So
no doubt.
Yeah.
So fun story. I may have told you this before, but Jake and Lacey were over here one night, and I was telling them the story about the first time I ever had a speaking gig, and it was one you gave me. I don't know if you remember, but it was a Youth for Christ lock-in at the YMCA. So I was super nervous because it was the first time I was going to do like my public speaking with like Love Life Ministries or whatever. And right before the event was about to kick off, there were two girls in the bathroom doing drugs and drinking.
Yes.
And I was like,
Percocet.
they were crushing up pills.
Why?
Percocet and Four Loko.
Four
What a
Loko,
good
you remember?
combo.
Yes, I remember that.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's deep. within
Yeah,
here,
I know, and so I was freaked out, and I'm like, I told you, and you were like, all right, man, you're kicking this event off. Go ahead and go get it started. And I was like, what?
Just throw you to the wolves.
And when I told Jake about it, he's like, yeah, that sounds like a Wayne thing would do. But it's just amazing because like through my early years of ministry, like just being even like late teen years and like early in ministry, you've always been taking me, like I remember you took me to I think it was Sherman Hills or something.
Yeah,
and
probably.
like as a kid, people are like, yeah, don't go over there. And you're like, hey, come on, we're going to go to this meeting. And I was like, do we need Kevlar? But you were like, yeah, man, like you just really instilled that in me. And it's just like seeing all these years later, you still being that same person. It's very encouraging.
Dude, and it's super. I was just thinking about it as I was driving over. I was like, man, I mean, I can't claim any, but I'm just so proud of you. And just the fact that you're still slugging at it, you know, it's like, it's really encouraging for people in ministry who have walked beside people, and to see the consistency and like, hey, you're going to do this, and just seeing where God is leading you and guiding you, man, that's, and getting married. And then she still puts up with you doing ministry stuff.
I know, dude.
Like,
It's crazy.
I do.
Thank God she
I'm
came
usually
from
just
a
like
ministry
right here
family.
too.
Yeah. Thank God she came from a ministry family. Otherwise,
Oh no, I probably would have loved.
yeah.
she had no idea what's going on if it was in the ministry family. Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So one of the topics we want to tackle today and get into is legalism versus liberalism.
Yeah.
So we were like looking things up and kind of like thinking it over and just understanding, you know, I grew up in a more legalistic type of environment. My dad went to the Baptist Bible College, so that obviously breeds a certain amount of legalism. And I, you know, thankfully over the years, I got to see my dad kind of slip out of that mentality and think for himself a little bit more and have a more well-balanced approach to it. But growing up in that, I personally feel like there were so many like rules to where I rebelled from it, and I still fight inside of myself. Like, you know, where's the line between I'm like, you know, I don't want to be legalistic, but I also don't want to like stray too far.
Yeah.
And I think the heart of it at the center is really just the gospel.
Yeah.
As far as like, you know, it's not about doing these rules or living freely because we claim that Christ has saved us and we can do whatever we want.
Yeah.
But it's more of like, do you have a legitimate relationship with Christ? And through the overflow of that comes conviction and comes obedience. And like I heard this one preacher the other day, and he was saying like obedience is greater than sacrifice. And it's like that reality of those two or three worlds kind of colliding. And but yeah, I don't know, what are your thoughts as far as like today's church and that battle?
Man, you know, as you threw that to me, I was thinking, man, both of those, it feels like both of those at the extremes are control. You know, like legalism is like, hey, I know that you're being a good Christian because you don't do or you do certain things. And so that gives the outsider the ability or that feeling of control. You know, I'm like, I can be safe around Dan because he does all the right things. And liberalism does the same thing. Like there's an extreme side of both of these, that there's safety because I know you do X, Y, and Z, and I'm safe to be around you. But really the messiness comes in the middle where we start asking questions, you know, and it starts to get into that space because, you know, when you're in any of those camps, when you start asking questions, you're like, why? You know, because I grew up in a super legalistic background as well. You know, the people who wore jeans to church were obviously the ones that did not know Jesus.
There's no jeans in my KJV, baby.
Exactly. I actually was a youth leader at a church where I had a blue acoustic electric guitar for the youth service, and I got pulled off the stage. I'm walking up on the stage, and the guy grabbed my arm and he goes, "I'm sorry, that guitar's too worldly." Like in front of everybody.
It was blue.
I was like, the guitar's too worldly. Like, what's too? Like, I was thinking so many evil things in my head at that moment. I was like, I'm here to praise Jesus, and you're making me stumble. You know?
Yeah, right.
So I understand that legalism, there's a control side of things, but in legalism, we don't ask heart questions. And so you can really be struggling, and you can really have big, deep faith questions and have a tension that you're not allowed to dive into at all, you know? And so having the ability to really invest in people, walk beside them when they seem to stray, you know, when they vote for somebody that you don't want to vote for, when they make a life choice that you're like, yo, what's going on with that? Legalism will cut them off completely and cancel culture them just the same way that liberalism will. When you stop walking beside us, boom, we're going to shut you off. And so there's a beauty in the gospel where we see Jesus interacting with the outsiders
Yeah.
of both camps.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Yeah, and I feel like I experienced that, especially like when I was in high school. There was a bunch of kids in my tech class when I was in AV.
Yeah.
And they were into like metal screamo music. I hated it. I didn't even like it at all. But like I wanted to connect with them, so I started listening to it. And then years later, I was the kid with the black hair with the red streak and the emo phase and all that. But like through that, it was funny because I was able to reach and speak to people that I would have never had the chance to without being in that scene.
Right.
But like I remember I had this girl I was talking to from camp, those summer, we're in a relationship and
Summer flame.
yeah. And she was like, something's changing. You listen to that screamo music now, and I just don't think you're a man of God anymore. And I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
But it's crazy, like how people will like shift that mentality. But like, it's those people that dare, like you said, dare to ask those questions.
This is one of the things that I feel I didn't learn until moving into this area, because the gospel, a lot of times it was like saving people from hell, but like the gospel is a ministry of reconciliation. Paul talks about that. It's like God is on our, Jesus comes on our behalf to be reconciled to the Father. And then we have the ministry of reconciliation to help reconcile the world to the Father, but also to each other. Like there's a significant amount of the New Testament which people aren't getting along. And Paul is coming in to go, hey, if we're not walking together, we're not sharing the gospel. We're not showing the gospel. And so the reconciliation side of the gospel is not possible when we sit in our little clubs, whether it's the liberal club or the hyper legalistic club. Like we need to get into a space where we're going to share the good news, and those evangelists that bring the unsaved people into the conservative, the legalistic crowd, they are doing that, right? But the majority of the people in that crowd are comfortable not going out. They're like, well, we'll train the person that comes in, and they're dependent on that one person with the evangelical, like spiritual gifting. So
Dan taught me a lot with legalism. I didn't even think I knew what it was until I met him. And then he came over my house or to church or something, and he put a cup somewhere. It was at church. And I was like, no, you can't put that there. It's holy. And he's like, why? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. And I was like, well, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. So like, there's a couple times where you really just taught me like, question these things. Is it in the Bible?
Right.
Yeah.
And
then there was another time where I went to sing somewhere and I couldn't stand at the altar to sing. I had to stand next to it. I had to be licensed to sing
And where did that come from? Well, it comes from in America when there were unlicensed preachers that could get thrown into prison, and the licensed preachers were the only ones that were allowed to preach in New England because they wanted to censor some religious beliefs.
Interesting.
Wow.
So if you go to Williamsburg right now, they actually have the Anglican Church was the major church in Williamsburg, and the Presbyterians were the only other church that was allowed to be proclaiming in Williamsburg. So if you were of any other religious faith and you decided to go out and preach on the street, you would be an unlicensed preacher and you'd be thrown in jail.
Wow.
Whoa.
So the idea of licensing makes a lot of sense in the history, but when you bring it to modern day and you're like, oh, and you need to be a licensed preacher, why?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when we met, I was like, you really need to be licensed so that we can do more things.
Right.
And then he was like, why? I'm like,
I
don't know.
I did 2 years of Bible college. Second year didn't go super well, but
well, yeah, Bible college probably creates a lot more of that legalism than we realize.
yeah.
So,
Oh my gosh.
because we start creating a tradition that when you ask why, that's offensive.
Yeah.
Like, why do you do that? That should be a conversation where we know.
Yeah.
And that there's grace and mercy, but a lot of times in tradition, I feel like those are the places that there's least amount of grace and least amount of mercy.
Yeah. No, and you see it in the Bible too. Blanking on the Berean church.
Yeah.
Yeah, like how they were questioning, was it Paul?
Yep.
Yeah,
They're checking with Paul.
I always scared when I'm preaching. I always get scared that I'm gonna say like Jonah instead of Noah, or like get somebody mixed up in my head in the moment, and I'm just like, but anyway. But like they questioned, they were asking and testing and approving whether it was real based on the scriptures, and it's like, we're called to, that mindset of, you don't have to be a theologian or an apologetics major, but like, when I went to Bible college, I didn't have that. Like, I went in the mindset of thinking I needed this piece of paper to do what I already know how to do.
Yeah.
But like when I also went in, any of the people that were like really like theology nerds and like more into apologetics, they were so arrogant and prideful that I wanted nothing to do with it. But then like Rabbi Zacharias, obviously, a little bit tricky topic now.
Right.
But like listening to him was the first time where I was like, oh, you can be humble and be confident in the truth.
Sure.
And that's what we need more of, is like, again, you're not trying to learn these things so you can win an argument, but because you can know God's heart better and have an answer for when people question you.
Dude, one of the scriptures that causes me the most frustration and like questioning is like Jesus says to his disciples, don't allow anybody to call you teacher. I'm like, what do we do with that? Because people are like, oh, Pastor Wayne. And I'm like, Wayne's fine. People, they have an issue with not giving me the honor and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, Jesus legit was like, don't have people call you teacher. The equivalent today is pastor. I'm like, if you want to call me anything, just call me Reverend Morgan. That's a little better. Usually they laugh and then they realize, okay. But Jesus also said, don't try to get to the best seat at the table. And we're supposed to be washing each other's feet. And Bible college does the exact opposite. It gets you to the place sometimes, if you're not careful, to know all the tradition.
We're back again.
You scared me.
Camera issues galore. So, all right.
It's that 13th episode.
13th episode.
It's cursed. It's cursed.
So you've been in the ministry for a long time. So what are some of the biggest wins and also downfalls in today's church?
So one of the biggest wins is I think we have no idea how much people are interested in spiritual things. So you're looking at research and the amount of people who've walked away from the church, the nuns, they're actually saying that the Bible is one of the most purchased books this year. And so you're seeing some of these evidences, but the legalism scares them away, right? Another thing that scares people away is like a lot of politics. So like people are always asking, why aren't you talking about politics? Because I know people who are on the fence are out as soon as you pledge allegiance to a specific candidate or a specific platform. So let's my platform be Jesus. And if you're offended, go find a church that does that. So, so I think that there's a spiritual hunger that there's a primed pump if we were to engage people with their questions. Now, when you do that, it's really messy. It's really messy. So, and I think the church, people who've been in the church for a long time, want the church to go back to that clean, tidy little place, and maybe some of that's just rose-colored lenses. But I think that there's a lot of potential for some really substantial growth because of the questions people are asking, but they're asking the questions about spirituality like crystals and Jesus are on the same platform. So if you're legalistic, you get really offended as soon as somebody starts asking about tarot cards or some of those other things. You're like, no, Jesus, like just like the 13th. I'm not nervous about the 13th. Jesus died for my sins. He conquers death. 13 has nothing on me. So, so
camera's still on.
Just had to check the camera's still there. Consequences are, but I think that that's one of the bigger hurdles for the church is that we have operated out of tradition for so long that it's very difficult to start thinking about how to engage a culture who's truly asking spiritual questions. And then the other part of this, I think the other part that's necessary, I think it's all the way around the country, but really more so here is I think that most evangelical churches in this area started in post-70s after the flood. And so people have, a friend of mine calls evangelicals the protesters that never stop protesting. And so a lot of people have left churches in the relational disconnect, and like we can't trust each other because I have somebody that went to that church that I don't like, And so for the last 20 plus years in this area, I've been trying to connect pastors and trying to get those ministries together because they just operate off of, somebody leaves my church and goes to your church and they start spitting trash. You're like, you know what? Wayne is a heretic. Like I knew that was the case.
Obviously.
I watched one YouTube video and he called the guy Noah instead of Jonah. And so he's definitely a heretic.
Solid throwback.
He has no idea what the Bible actually says. So like we start operating out of that. And so that's why I think we've got to get to the place where we see the gospel as reconciliation, like it's restorative. And then so I think, and if we put those two things together, we have people who are searching. They're looking, they have a consumer mindset. So they go from a church to a church to church, and then they show up at our church and they say, hey, this is what's going on at that other church. And instead of with grace and mercy, going, hey, you know what? They love Jesus and they're just doing it a different way than I am. Then we can actually start to divide the body of Christ with people who are desperately searching. And so that's what I see currently as we look at the scope of what's going on across the country. Some of the things that we're seeing is like hot button things that are percolating. And then the reality of things that we've worked with for years, been able to start tearing down some of those walls. And I think that if our pastoral staff can know each other and can like start like shepherding people who are desperately looking, I think that we'll see some major growth in the church.
Yeah. Amen.
Do you think that like cancel culture and social media is playing a role in any of downfalls?
So I think that I think Gen Alpha is like, I think millennials are cancel culture people, but Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they actually say that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are the most spiritually questioning, but they also are the least offended.
Okay.
And so like they've seen what their older brothers and sisters have done, or they've seen what their parents have done, and they're like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So they can have deeply conflict in spiritual conversations and not take offense to it.
Okay.
So it's really interesting. It's almost like they saw the downfall of that like outrage culture, and there's a little bit of a reaction against it. So
nice.
So everything kind of moves back and forth, and if we're paying attention, then maybe we can see what God's doing.
Yeah,
so.
That's one of the things I love about like Restored, as far as like seeing them like post on Facebook, hey, this week we're praying for this church, or this week and it's like that is so encouraging,
right?
And it's one of the things that's hard, especially with like bivocational pastors, because like our schedules are already crazy, so like we don't have time to meet like during the day with other pastors. But I'm always excited, like we have the pastor down the road from our church in 44 is Methodist pastor, and like just had so many great conversations, like. And even like I had like a really hard decision to make, and I talked to him on the phone for like an hour, and I was like having those sounding boards and being able to encourage one another. Or like, our church, the furnace just went out at Wyoming Avenue, and like they're like, hey, if you need chairs, let us know. Like, that should be the thing. We should be able to pull resources to get things done.
Right. Because I mean, in the Northeast, we're only 3%, like 3% evangelical is China, and we're like 1%. So like if we think about it, we are really in a space where we need to collaborate in order to reach the lost and dying world.
Yeah.
So
it's been hard.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Definitely a lot of hills to climb.
Yeah.
It was way easier to have a youth pastors network because you're like, hey, let's get together and have food. And youth pastors are like,
pizza.
Let's go.
We've had it 12 times this week, but we'll have it again.
But then when we started running a pastors network, they're like, all right, what's the schedule? What are we going to be talking about? Who's going to be speaking? And there were so many logistics. I was like, dude, you guys are like type A.
Doing it too much.
I just want you to know who each other are.
Y'all need to calm down.
Yeah, you just need to chill. I actually, when I started with Youth for Christ, I started in and I would accidentally overlap times with pastors because I knew they wouldn't get together with each other. So I'd be like, you're at 9:30, you'd be at 9:45, and I'd be like, oh, I'm so
we're good.
sorry. Yeah, I saw it click. So I'd overlap to just get them to know each other, you know, and they never met each other. I ran one network meeting where two pastors met each other and they were like, "Oh, are you new to the area?" They're like, "No, I've been in the area for 10 years."
Yeah.
And they literally lived under 5 miles apart.
Isn't that wild?
They probably shopped at the same supermarket and didn't even know each other were there.
Yeah.
So
we've talked about this even like as pastors' family. Who does a pastor talk to for guidance?
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
it's great to connect to each other. So you have that people like coming home to me, like, who do I talk with? Do I talk to the other women? Is there other pastors' wives that we can
Right.
connect with? So it's very interesting.
yeah. One of the craziest things that we ever
That's a
did
good
was have the youth pastors and bring their spouses. And Derek Hodney and I were sitting there talking, and Mandy Chapman, Doug was a youth pastor at the time, and then Lauren and Karen were all in their little crew over in the corner, and one of them said, "I can't believe he does that too." And Derek looked me square in the eyes and goes, "We're in so much trouble." So yeah, being able to just say, "Hey," and it's good to have people outside of the area, right?
Yeah.
The baby monitor. Sorry, you're good.
Yeah,
it's
you're
a baby monitor that keeps making the sound.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I think it's good to have people outside of the area, but here in Northeast Pennsylvania, things are just a little different, you know? So it's good to have somebody you can have a phone call with down the street, you know, where you can have, coffee toe to toe, knee to knee. When you're out of bounds, they can tell you. It's harder to tell somebody when you're over the phone, you know, like, I think you're making a mountain out of a molehill, but somebody that knows you, walks beside you, knows other people that you're dealing with, probably hears the other side of the story, can really interact with the conversation. So local relationships are a must for people in ministry. So, yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
So on to well, that's all serious, but more serious note is talking about, you know, the time that you went through dealing with having cancer and all that came with that. How did you keep your faith so strong, and then also dealing with, you know, still being in ministry, but like how did that come to, you know, the people coming together and rallying with you? Like, what was that whole experience?
Yeah. This November 26th was my 18th year of diagnosis. And so I referenced it earlier. It's probably one of the most formative things for me. But what was more formative than cancer was I was ordained 1 month earlier. So I spent an entire year studying God's word, studying what I believed, writing a doctrinal statement saying, hey, God is sovereign, God is in control. Like, here is how strong God is. This is how he works with probably the hardest thing I've ever gone through was going and remodeling my house. Like, I watched this old house thing, but in order to get into this area, I needed affordable housing. I bought a house for $26,000. And then I'm like, I'll just remodel it myself because I'd worked with contractors. Well, that was a lot, right? That was a lot. And so I was studying for ordination, rebuilding a house, learning how to work for Youth for Christ, you know, just learning everything new because Bible college taught me stuff, but actually doing it was so much different. And so, that was where my faith was tested. I think the hardest was when I was sitting in the middle of no carpet, no sheetrock, no nothing, sitting in the middle of a room on a bucket going, God, what on earth are you doing? You know, like that was hard. That was really hard. So I did that by myself. And then I got diagnosed with cancer and people are there. I was like, where were you a couple months ago? Because I need people help me hang the sheetrock.
Of course.
You know? But God was faithful through that lonely season. And so I studied who he was. And then through cancer, it was like, all right, let's see what you can do. It literally was a space where I was like, just all I could do is wait. Like I was working before. I was studying. I was doing it all. And then it was like, be still. And so I had a unique prepping for that cancer journey. It wasn't like it just caught me off guard. It was like, no, it was like God had prepared me for the biggest waiting period of my life.
Wow.
And I was like, all right, if God does do what we say he does, then I want as many people praying for me as possible, you know? And so, people are really good with, Christians are really good with sickness. They're really good with illness. And so as long as you keep telling people what's going on, like they care they pour out, you know? And so we want to communicate well through that, but not over communicate.
Yeah.
And so just sharing our dependency on God. And then Karen was sending out emails, of course, and she has a knack for writing, and she's a pretty, you know, like, I'm like, wow, you wrote this? That would take me like
so professional.
8 years to write. Yeah. So she also had a gifting where she kept people engaged with her writings, and ended up publishing it as a book. And so just the emails, you know, just the emails, they call them a Morgan update. It's a 500-page book, but it was all the emails, just the updates that we sent out. And so,
wow.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Crazy.
Awesome.
Do you constantly do checkups and stuff because of that?
So yeah, I did for the first 10 years. They were really diligent about the checkups, and now it's like, well, we've gone through a lot of like radiation and stuff. So they're like, stay away from radiation. That means stay away from, you know, buy a cell phone with, you know, because I've been through so much radiation and so many tests that I just have to live differently, you know? So I buy
Didn't you say you're not allowed to have a microwave in the house?
Yeah, I
too?
don't have a microwave. Haven't had a microwave for over 20 years.
Wow.
So, because that emits radiation. Like, you can't get away from radiation, but the more you can just intentionally stay away from it, the better.
Throw out the microwave.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
we would be in so much trouble in this house.
my wife was not happy. Karen was like,
kids and no microwave?
What? Yeah. Like, okay, how are we going to do this? And I'm like, I don't know, but I threw it in the dumpster, you know?
You have to do it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's interesting you said that you shared it through it all. I'm very different with sickness. Like, I want to keep that in a bubble.
Right.
And when you said, that's very interesting. I don't think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you share too much, then people can pounce on it.
Yeah.
And, like, at that point in time, I didn't care. You know, we were like, I was given a 40% chance of survival. So it was like, if God's going to do something, we want a lot of people knowing. And he, there's a lot of difficult spaces in that. And like, probably one of the hardest things, I usually take the 26th off, because one of the hardest things for me is the survivor guilt. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah. And you get it every time, can't speak, every time you share the story. It's like, why are you and not grandma?
Yeah.
Why are you and not Uncle Jimmy? I don't know.
Yeah.
When I get to heaven, I'll ask Jesus. But at this point in time, I know that he has given me the ability to say God still fixes broken stuff. And I'm going to say it until I die. Yeah. And so I'm going to shout it to the hilltops that God is in the business of fixing. And so he did it with cancer. He can do it with other things. So ultimately, he wants us healed spiritually. And so being able to use this story as an example of the gospel.
Yeah.
So.
And as you got through that, and you were in the clear, like, I mean, you can kind of see just by looking at your life, but it impacted your ministry as well, how you went about things. Yeah,
that was one of the areas that started to break into, like, people all supported me as a Youth for Christ missionary, but that actual trust and that actual people would, like, they would just, like, we shared so much of who we were that people literally trusted us. And it was like, all right, I need to use this for God's glory and not for Wayne Morgan Ministries, because I've had people say, well, why didn't you start Wayne Morgan Ministries? I'm like, because in 6 months I could be dead if cancer spurts back up. Yeah. But if I connect people, if I help the body of Christ come together in a way that only he could do through my illness, then, to God be the glory. His name rises, my name fades into history, So,
powerful.
So, yeah. And even through that, it was amazing, because the liberal side of things, going back to the original conversation of liberal versus like legalists were like, they were calling me up going, wait, I had testicular cancer. So legalists would be like, so should I say that from the pulpit? I was like, you can call it unspoken cancer if you'd like to, and then you've got the liberal side who's it's like it's just science and all this other stuff, and I'm like like I don't care what it was, Jesus gave them the ability to give the science, like I don't care what it was, but God is woven all the way through this.
Oh yeah, amen.
And so it's really interesting to be able to walk in, especially for the last 18 years. I've been going into camps and all sorts of spaces where I've got people, I don't know where they are theologically, and I'm going in telling the story of redemption from my own life, and people like just radically, like redemption radically it challenges you, whether you're in that hyper liberal or, because both of them want control.
Yeah.
And when God changes your life, it breaks both molds.
Yeah.
And people go, I don't know what just happened. And that's a beautiful part about the gospel, is it likes the color outside the lines.
Yeah. Amen to that.
And so during that time you were married, correct?
Yeah.
So
and had kids too at that point.
Kirita and Taylor were like 3 and 1.5. So,
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were little.
Wow.
So that's an interesting time, like even for your wife to be like, have these little people and now you might die. That's horrible.
Oh, and I made it worse. So
No.
I did. So all these people came out and they're like, hey, we want to take your kids, want to care for them. And I was like, yeah, that's cool, but I need to see what I'm fighting for. So we're from Susquehanna County, Binghamton area. And so people were like, oh, we'll take them for a week. We'll take them for a little bit. And it's like, no, I need my kids here.
Yeah.
And so Karen was setting up people to come in. We had a friend come from Western New York who was a Youth for Christ staff member that loved the kids, and she was loved by the kids. She came out and stayed a week. And so from like November to April, I was in chemotherapy, and it was people were coming out and staying at our house, just living at our house. So it was I made it worse because I made her do logistics for all of us.
Well, it'll help you fight, right?
Yeah, for sure. It really did.
Yeah. Weird. Awesome. Well, a more, light note transition here. We were talking about this before. So John Christ. Oh, now I got messages. Hopefully
Hurry
they're not.
up.
See you soon.
See you soon.
See you
There
soon.
you
There you go.
So John Christ does this church or weed shop thing in California. So we're going to pause it and see if you can figure out which one it is.
All right, sounds good.
Shop Long Beach edition. I pull up. I'm going to just tell you the name of it. You guess. Is that a church or a weed shop? If you had to guess, is Dream City a church or a weed shop?
Oh, dang it.
Oh,
I paused it.
I was going to say church.
Okay,
I was going to
okay.
say church because that definitely has a charismatic feel to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dream City.
Dream City. Yeah, California churches.
Why?
Dream City Church.
Catalyst.
Oh, that's a church. That has to be a church.
Catalyst. Think about it. Is that a church or a weed shop? Well, in Long Beach, that is
Oh, it's a weed shop.
Weed
Wow.
shop. Revive in Long Beach, California.
Revive?
Revive. Oh, man.
You don't even know anymore.
And Long Beach.
That last one threw me off so hard the first time. I was like, Catalyst?
Yeah.
No.
No, Catalyst is actually a conference.
Yeah, I know.
Let's revive. I mean, weed slows you down.
California Revive is a church.
Okay, yeah.
California Heights. Think of
California Heights.
That's going to be a church.
about it. Is it California Heights or California Heights? The Haven. Think about it. Sunday morning, 10:30. Meet me at the Haven. I'll even
Oh, that's a church.
give you some clues. This is who we are. This is why we exist. This is what we care about. Wrong. Sorry. Cannabis.
Really?
City Lights. One word.
Oh, that could go
church.
either
City
way.
Lights.
City Lights. I think that's a 50-50. There's no way I could go one way or the other.
Word. City Lights in Long Beach, California is a church. The Loft. 2 words.
That sells
Loft.
cannabis. The Loft. That sounds like a cannabis shop. I mean, it could.
That's all I got to say to you. The Loft is a church. What about King's Crew? 2 words.
King's Crew.
Oh man, I don't know. Long Beach. I don't know. Like, so if it was L.A., I'd be like Latin Kings. It's definitely a cannabis shop. Let's go with church.
King's Crew. Hold on, there's a guy walking out of there. I don't want to film him. King's Crew in Long Beach, California, is a dispensary. Also, for sure, the name of a non-denominational youth group. Church or weed shop.
Oh, wow. That's insane.
Those names are wild.
Yeah. There are a couple of those really. Catalyst especially threw me for a bit of a loop.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm like, how is it a catalyst? But I don't want to know.
Yeah.
So at the end of each show with a guest, we ask questions. So our last guest was Tori. She wanted to know which movie was better, Elf or Home Alone 2.
Oh, man. Elf is the first one we watch every year. So because of that, I'm going to have to go with Elf.
Yeah.
It's like the one that you're
stands.
like, oh, I know him.
I preach an entire sermon using clips from the movie Elf.
Oh, that's
awesome.
awesome.
I've done it a bunch of times, and it's so fun.
Yeah,
It's so fun.
exactly.
Do you have a question for the next guest?
Do I have a question for
I
you?
should have told you that ahead of time so you could think about it. But,
Yeah, so...
but you're a deep person.
You can do it.
So you want a deep question or a ridiculous
Any-
question?
Hey, you can go either way. We had a question one time. Is soup... What was it? Is cereal...
Is cereal a soup?
Is cereal a soup?
Yeah.
Wow.
Cereal soup.
That is...
ridiculous question.
You always have is water wet? Those
Yeah,
type of things really can throw people off. So probably what is the worst Christmas you've ever had? Best or worst Christmas? So because you're probably going to be around the Christmas time, so yeah, you give them either one. Best Christmas or worst Christmas, and then it'll at least be a fun story to hear a little bit more about them.
There we go. Definitely.
That's good.
All right. Any final words of wisdom for the podcast?
Oh man, well, honestly, I think I said at the beginning, I'm super proud of you, man.
Thanks.
I'm just so excited to see what God's doing in you, and with stuff like social media and a podcast, the ability to get the word out and to reach people you're not reaching in church. Like, this is beautiful. So keep up the good work. I'm thankful that your wife is applauding you and here with you doing this. So and probably a lot smarter than you too.
Yeah,
So,
she
work,
gets the
brother.
logistics down for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and make sure to join us.
Thank you.
Like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you next week on Speaking Through the Gray.
Speaking through the gray. Speaking through the gray. Speaking through the gray. How did it happen?